Oh my goodness, we're back. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Bleak, and welcome to another installment of Scarecrow's Chamber. Today, I would like to, I'm been in the history realm lately, so I'm gonna try to stay in the history realm. And today, I would like to talk about a particular military nobility that goes back to the medieval times, early modern Japan from the late 12th century. Now, when I say Japan, you probably know what I'm, referring to. Medieval times. That, of course, the samurai. Yo. Now, the samurai is also. It was just something that I was also into as well, man. I mean, just the look, just the type of armor and just the weaponry and stuff. Like, I'm gonna tell you something. When it comes to weaponry, when it comes to just art of war and just weapons of war and stuff like that, I've always thought that the samurai was just the coolest. I mean, I just thought they just had just the best look when it came to just going to battle, man. So I would just like to just talk a little about the history of the samurai and the culture and the impact of what still is celebrated. I want to say celebrated, but probably just still remembered amongst the Japanese today. So, like I said, from the 12th century until their abolishment of 1876, because going into the turn of the century, the Meiji Restoration put the emperor back in charge. But the samurai, they basically ran Japan for more than, between like 250 to 300 years or something like that. Because, throughout the history of ancient Japan, they were pretty much separated into four different classes. You at the bottom, you had the peasantry, the artisans, the merchants, and at the top, the samurai, Shogun. And of course, the word that really is synonymous when you hear the word samurai is Bushido. Bushido pretty much is a code. It's a martial code that talks about martial virtues, indifferences to pain, and flinching loyalty, engaging in local battles and stuff like that. So the Bushido was basically a code that every samurai followed. Because, like I said, the samurai, they pretty much were the highest form of government. They ran the country for several centuries. So they had this moral code, concerning samurai attitudes, behaviors, and lifestyle. And then there are multiple, Bushido types that evolved, through history. Contemporary forms of Bushidos are still used, in social, economic organizations throughout Japan, even to today. And Bushido was also used as a overarching term for all of the codes, practices, philosophies, principles of culture and stuff like that. And it's usually analogous to the European concept of chivalry, but there are like major differences. But for example, the samurai, they always believe that you should fight with honor, as opposed to the shinobi, better known as ninjas. To be a ninja, it means to hide. It means to attack without being seen. Well, the samurai were the exact opposite. That they believed in, engaging, in the honorable way. For example, you stab somebody in the back, you have no honor. Shave off your top knot. It's just that old school, way of looking at things, man. Just that attitude, it's just the morals that they had, So when you see it, for example, I really need to get into film director Akira Kurosawa. He made a lot of films that goes back during the days of the Shogun. So I really need to get into his films. I've seen glimpses of it. I've seen one of them, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful, but I really need to dig into his work, man, because he did a lot of samurai films and stuff like that. But I just want to talk a little bit about the history, and once again, I have a little bit of history written in front of me, so I'm just going to read it, verbatim. The predecessors in the early military and administrative officers, the samurai truly emerged during the Kamakura shogunate, ruling from circa 1185 to 1333. They became the ruling political class with significant power, but also significant responsibility. During the 13th century, the samurai proved themselves as adept warriors against the invading Mongols. During the peaceful Edo period from 1603 to 1868, they became stewards and chamberlains of the daimyo estate. Daimyo meaning, landowners and stuff like that, gaining managerial experience and education. In the 1870s, samurai families comprised 5% of the population. As modern militaries emerged in the 19th century, the samurai were rendered increasingly obsolete and very expensive to maintain compared to the average conscript soldier. The Meiji Restoration ended their feudal roles and they moved into the professional and entrepreneurial roles. Their memory and weaponry remain prominent in Japanese culture, popular culture, even till today. So just to give you a glimpse of, how this came to be and stuff like that. And now, when you think Japan, because obviously, when you think Japan, you think a lot of, martial arts and stuff like that, and karate and all that stuff. But a lot of people don't know this. Karate it wasn't actually started on mainland in Japan. Karate actually was practiced in Okinawa first. That's where it came from. Karate is Okinawan. And it wasn't really brought to Japan until the 1930s. And I believe Sensei Funakoshi, who is the founder of Shogun, which is, that was a style of karate that I practiced. But he was, the headmaster who formed Shogun, and I believe he was one of the few who brought, karate to the mainland Japan. Because before karate hit Japan in the 1930s, you had the jitsu and jujitsu in on the mainland that was practiced. Now, when you talk about, wartime with the samurai, most of it was weapons training and weapon techniques and stuff like that. But, occasionally in battle, sometimes you, get disarmed and stuff like that. So what techniques would the samurai use during battle? And it's a lot of, grappling and throwing, like a lot of takedowns and stuff like that. So I can just imagine wearing all that heavy armor, dishing all those techniques, man. It couldn't have been pleasant. Obviously somebody's trying to take your head off, and then you have to, do all this defense and stuff like. So the different arts and stuff like that was really intriguing to really go down. But once again, got some, writing in front of me. I'm gonna read it a little bit verbatim. Right? Just bear with me here. By the late 12th century, upper-class samurai were highly literate because of the general introduction of Confucianism from China during the 7th to 9th century. And in response to their perceived need to deal with the imperial court, who had a monopoly on culture and literacy for most of the Heian period. As a result, they aspired to the more cultural abilities of the nobility. Examples such as Tadanori, a samurai who appears in the Monogatari, demonstrate that warriors idolized the art and aspired to become skilled in them. Tadanori was famous for his skill with the pen and the sword, or the bun and the bu, the harmony of fighting and learning. Samurai were expected to be cultured and literate and admired the ancient saying, Bunbu Rirodo, literal arts, military arts, both ways. With the pen and the sword. It's actually, the pen is mighty and the sword. I don't know if that's where that came from, but that saying, sounds familiar. By the time of the Edo period, Japan had a higher literacy compared to the Central Europe. The number of men who actually achieved the ideal and lived their lives by it was high. And early term for warrior, Urawashi, was written with the kanji that combined the characters for literacy study. Bun in military arts, Bu, and is mentioned in the Heike Monogatari, late 12th century. The Heike Monogatari makes references to the educated poet swordsman ideal in his mention of Tairi no Tadanori's death. Like I said, I'm just reading this stuff verbatim, so excuse me if I'm butchering stuff. But basically, so like, when it came to the samurai, it wasn't just all fighting and war. I mean, they really were scholars in a lot of ways. And when I used to, read about this stuff, when I was younger, it was really fascinating to learn about this stuff because when you hear samurai, mostly you just hear, just war and stuff like that. But they actually had a way of life because, like I said, they were the highest. They were the highest officials in the land. They ran the country. They were pretty much the government. So they had to come up with different, regulations and laws and all of these different, teachings to educate people and stuff like that. So they had to their own education system and stuff that they learned and that they taught and stuff like that. So it's pretty crazy to read about that stuff. And I remember reading about it, when I was a little bit younger. But when I was younger, all I cared about, was the combat aspect of it. But when you get down and learn to the actual art, the code, and the morals that they had, it's really amazing to learn about it. And there actually were female samurais as well. I actually want to get into a little bit of that. No, Tomi Gozen, and that name actually sounds familiar. I think it was actually in probably a game that I played. But pretty recently, there's this samurai game called Ghost of Tsushima. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It's one of the best games I've played. Highly recommend it. And there was a female character named Tomoe. That might be her. I don't know. But anyway, there actually were female samurais back in the day, and I'm gonna read a little bit of this. Maintaining the household was the main duty of women of the samurai class. This was especially crucial during early feudal Japan, when warrior husbands were often traveled abroad or engaged in clan battles. The wife, or okugata-sama, meaning one who remains in the home, was left to manage all household affairs, care for the children, and perhaps even defend the home forcibly. For this reason, many women of the samurai class were trained in wielding a polearm called the naginata, or special knife called the kaiken, and an art called tanto jutsu. Now the tanto, because like I said, in the samurai weapons, they have different swords. The main one was the katana, but they had bigger swords, and they had smaller ones. Now the tanto, that was that little small blade that they would, keep on the hip and stuff like that, so they could, draw real quickly. That was the tanto, and you mostly see a lot of shinobi that would use the tanto a lot. They had the katana, of course, but the tanto was what they would use for like the close quarter, quick range attacks and stuff like. So the tanto jutsu, that was pretty much basically skill with the knife. Basically, that's what it was. And back, which they could use to protect their household, family, and honor if the need arose. There were women who actively engaged in battles alongside male samurai in Japan, although most of the female warriors were not formal samurai. The samurai daughter's greatest duty was political marriage. These women married members of the enemy class of their families to form a diplomatic relationship. These alliances were staged for many intrigues, wars, and tragedies throughout Japanese history. A woman could divorce her husband if he did not treat her well, and if he did not treat her well, and also if he was a traitor to his wife's family. A famous case was that of the Oda Tokahime, daughter of Nobunaga. Now, for all you gamers out there, you probably know the name Nobunaga, but like I said, Nobunaga was a real person. This guy was pretty much the ultimate warlord. He just took over land after land after land, so he was like one of the big dogs. But going back, irritated by the antics of her mother-in-law, Lady Tsukiyama, the wife of Tokugawa Ieyasu, another big name. She was able to give Lady, I'm shortening some of these, Lady Sokuyama arrested of the suspicion of communicating with the Takeda clan, then a great enemy of Nobunaga and the Oda clan. Ieyasu also arrested his own son, Matsudari Nobuyasu, who was Tokihime's husband, because Nobunaga was close to his mother, Lady Tsukiyami, to assuage his ally Nobunaga Ieyasu and Lady Tsukiyami executed in 1579. And that same year ordered his son to commit seppuku. Now, the samurai, their ancient ritual of suicide, which was called seppuku or harikiri. Harikiri literally means stomach cutting. Seppuku means honorable death, because the samurai believed to only lead to the best way to leave this world with any semblance is to take your own life. The samurai had this code to never surrender. They always will leave the world taking their own life. So they believe in committing seppuku, which means honorable death. So that is a big thing. You know, if you study or learn about the history of samurai, you always will hear the words seppuku and harikiri. And I want to go a little bit into, to the turn of the century when the Meiji Restoration, put the emperor back in charge. Now, going into the early 1900s, early 20th century, a lot of the descendants of all these samurai, they still carried on that samurai spirit, that warriors, that warrior's heart. So a lot of them joined the military, the Navy in particular, some in the Army, but there was factions that were forming under the Emperor Hirohito. I'm sure you probably know who he is if you study World War II. But there was these factions that was forming, and Hideki Tojo, if you know who he is, he was pretty much the man who led Japan into World War II. If it wasn't for him, Pearl Harbor may not have even happened. But those factions that were forming after the Meiji Restoration, they pretty much, all they knew was war. All they knew was, because a lot of them were descendants of the samurai clans and stuff that were disbanded by the Meiji Restoration. So going into World War II, obviously, the Kempe Tai, I guess I don't really want to go too much into World War II, but the Kempe Tai in Japanese means loyal soldier. And the Kempe Tai was pretty much formed by General Tojo, who was, he wasn't head of state, but he was head of government. He was right under, Emperor Hirohito during World War II. But they all had that samurai spirit, that samurai, that grit. And it's crazy, I've read a little about how they were some foreign samurai as well. For example, there was an English sailor and adventurer by the name of William Adams between 1564 and 1620. He was amongst one of the first Westerners to receive the dignity of samurai, which is crazy. And I remember hearing about that. Now, I believe it's a game based on it too. I got one of those games too. I forgot the damn name because I haven't played it so long. But the terminology, bushi, meaning warrior, or yuke, meaning military family. Just going into the terminology and the history and the philosophy. Philosophy, it derived from a lot of religious influences, obviously, in Asia. Buddhism, was very big, and Zen, and Confucianism, and Shinto. Shinto was exclusively, I believe, Japan. For example, when you go to Japan, you have these things called Shinto, which is a shrine, and it's classified as a religion by scholars and other practitioners, regards in Japan that is indigenous to Japan history and culture. Now, I'm sure when you see pictures of Japan, you see these big things called tories, the Torii Gateway. And as a matter of fact, I believe I have a picture of a torii on my YouTube page. But the Torii gates, the presence of the Torii is basically just an entrance that is usually, it represents some type of spiritual thing. It's the simplest way to identify Shinto shrines, and the icon that represents them in Japan, road maps and stuff like that. But the appearance of the Torii in Japan can be reliably pinpointed to at least the mid Heian period. They're mentioned in the written text that goes back to like 922. The oldest existing stone Torii was built in the 12th century, and I believe it belonged to the Hachimen shrine, something like that. But the Torii gates, they were traditionally made, out of wood or stone, but today they can also be made out of concrete, copper, stainless steel, and stuff like that. You see a lot of forms of them, but they usually were unpainted and stuff like that, and then they start to because of course in modern times they begin to doll them up a little bit and stuff like that. But the origins of the Torii, the origins are kind of actually unknown, and there's several different theories on the subject. But it was always said if you pass through a Torii gate, it was to bring good fortune and stuff like that, and it's a very, very it's a very, very symbolic gate. You see them all throughout Asia. It's not actually just Japan. You see them in India. You do see them in China, Thailand, and Korea and stuff like that. So I've always thought that the semblance behind the Torii gate was always pretty interesting. That's why I've always kind of used them a lot in pictures and stuff like that. And other theories claim, the Torii may be related to Pailu of China, because China is considered, to be the ancestry of, when it comes to the Asian way of life. I think China is kind of like the oldest, or something like that. It's kind of like how Africa is for a lot of different cultures and stuff like that. But it is absolutely amazing how the Shogun, they incorporated all of these type of laws, because that's the one thing about the Shaolin and the Shogun. The Shaolin were never really the head of government, the head of state, or anything like that. The Shaolin were kind of like these rogue practitioners who wanted to preserve as much knowledge and stuff like that, and to bestow it upon anyone who would listen and stuff like that. The samurai were fighters. They were warlords. They were pretty much, they were military. They were bred to fight and bred to protect and stuff. So going into the history of the Shogun and stuff like that, and just seeing how they're portrayed and stuff like that in the films, it's truly amazing. And I've always just loved this style, man. Like, for example, crazy thing about it, people don't know this. When I have to talk about this in another episode, but the great George Lucas, you might know who he is. If you look at Star Wars and you look at the concept of good and evil, a lot of that comes from, it has a big Asian influence. The yin yang, the negative and the positive, the dark and the light. A lot of that is incorporated in Star Wars. For example, if you look at Lord Vader, his design, you look at his helmet, his cloak, his fighting style, the way he fights with his saber and stuff like that. That is Japanese to the fullest. If you really, really look at it, he looks. If you look at his appearance, he looks like a shogun. He looks like a samurai. So that's probably why he was always my favorite character throughout the Star Wars, story. So like that, I just loved his style, just his look, his design, and stuff like that. And it's really heavily, influenced by the Oriental, style and the Oriental way of life. If you really look at the Star Wars lore and the concept behind it, it's highly has an Oriental influence on it. And with the lightsabers and stuff like that, just the fighting styles and stuff, that is samurai to the fullest, man. And it's just the great thing how it just spans to different cultures throughout the world and stuff like that. But yeah, man, I just wanted to touch upon some samurai history as well, man, because I have a huge interest in the Shogun just as much as I do for the Shaolin. So I just wanted to, touch up on that, and I'm gonna close up my time here, signing off. As always, everybody, I'm Bleak Nelson. Until we meet again, safe journey. Peace.